good morning. Welcome to B Cube Sunday morning. It is a great Sunday in June if you don't live in LA, but I'm sure our hosts will probably get to that, so I'll just let them have their day. But it's here at B Cube. We're excited for this being second Sunday where we bring in Tom and all of his guests. But before I go there, I just wanted to say thank you, all of you guys, for showing up. Now, Tom, it's all yours.
Good heavens. If it's all mine, what will I do with it? Where will I keep it? Um, Today we have Karen K.G. Anderson and Philip Brian Hall, both of whom are doing new projects at what some people would consider an advanced age. Philip has just started doing a Substack. Karen has just published her first book. And we're going to talk about why it's important to be doing all this sort of stuff right now, not just for political reasons, but for all the reasons that it's important to do things. I'm going to let Philip talk a little. Actually, I'll let Karen go first and talk about her book, and then Philip talk about your Substack, and we'll just get into conversation and keep going wherever we go.
Okay, thanks, Tom. This is the book, and it has 15 of my short stories that I've written over the past 8 years. And when I wrote them, it never occurred to me that they would have any shelf life past a year or two, because I assumed that the United States would come to its senses politically. And since they haven't, the stories are not only continue to be relevant, but have actually, in many cases, come true, which is truly terrifying and depressing. This morning, I was on Facebook and I saw someone that I follow who wrote kind of belligerently, I thought, what are you doing to have an effect? What thread are you pulling to be part of the current resistance? And I felt kind of intimidated and thought, well, I'm not going out there and marching around recently. And then I realized that while I consider, writing a book a pretty easy thing to do, I had all the stuff already written and published in a number of different publications, both Bob's and some other ones, that I realized that because of my age, I'm 70, I was able to publish this without any fear. And that previously in my career, I worked for a number of corporations and a number of nonprofits that would have gotten pretty upset if I had been out publicly doing readings and speaking out online and saying some of the things that I say in this book. And I realized that as an older person and someone who is mostly retired from the corporate and nonprofit world, that I am in a unique position of privilege to be able to say these obnoxious things and challenge people. And I intend to do that. So that's my reason for publishing the book. Let's find out about Philip and his Substack, which is really awesome.
Philip has a long and interesting history, and I hope you'll tell us a little bit about your background and what leads you into this too.
Well, I'm not sure how much of my background is relevant to writing. My writing only started this century, really. I did write a novel while I was still at high school, but unfortunately, it was never to see the light of day. The novels that I've written this century would never have seen the light of day either, eventually, I suspect, because not too many agents are interested in people who are 78 years old, and not too many people not too many publishers, I beg your pardon, want to take up with people who might not have a very long shelf life themselves, as Karen was saying, let alone a very long shelf life for the book. Anyhow, well, my background, I started on the wrong side of the tracks. I was fortunate enough to obtain an open scholarship to Oxford University. I went from Oxford University to the diplomatic service, where I at a very, very early stage. I'd been in the business for a very short length of time. I was sitting in the Security Council. I think I've been in the business for 3 weeks and 1 day, and I was sitting in the Security Council when the delegate from the United Arab Republic, as it was then called, nowadays called Egypt, arrived and said, "When is your foreign minister coming?" And I was so well clued up that I didn't even know the answer to that tricky question. But by the time I'd been there a year or so, I was actually capable of representing the UK on my own. I was on my own one day in the third committee of the United Nations when the American delegate arrived and sat next to me. You probably know the American delegate in question. I think whether you know her as Shirley Temple or Shirley Black, I'm not sure, but anyway. So so we had a little chat together, and that happened to be the day that I think it was I can't remember which Apollo mission. Anyhow, it was struck by lightning on the way up, and this was news was circulating all around the third committee, and we actually Shirley went out to find out what was happening and brought back the news to me, which was very kind of her, I thought, because I was on my own and I couldn't move, and she had other delegates who could take over from her in the seat. So there you go. My claim to fame, I once sat in the third committee with Shirley Temple. I then went to South Africa. I was in the British High Commission in Nairobi. And after that, I was unfortunately invalided out of the diplomatic service. I took up a career in teaching, which I stayed in from until I took early retirement from that. Became a webmaster for a very short period of time, and then I said, really, what I want to do is write, so I'm going to do that. And I produced a novel, which is called The Prophets of Baal, which I've got a copy of here. Is that going to show up? There we are. Got a very nice lady on the front cover, who is the model of a Romanian photographer from whom I bought the photograph, and I have to pay more if the book sells 100,000 copies. So I need everybody to get out there and buy the remaining 99,950, and that should be all right. Oh, that's me. Oh, the Substack. Yes, beg your pardon. My brother came to stay with me a few months ago, and he was saying this seems to be the way to communicate these days. And if you want to get a point across, you shouldn't worry about your blog. You should go on Substack. So I thought I'd try that, and here we are. And my Substack article today, by the way, in case anybody has the nerve to read it, is called Complacency in Washington. So you may judge what it's about. I did teach economics for about 30 years, so I have a small inkling about.
Philip, I have a question for you.
Hello, it says on my screen.
I had encountered you through one of Bob's books. How did you find out about B Cubed Press and decide to write for Bob?
I usually look for American publishers on the Grinder, it's called, which is a sort of listing system.
Yes.
And Bob's name, or Bob's company, came up there, and I thought, well, I cannot write specifically about American issues, because obviously it will be clear that I'm writing as an outsider. But I can write about general principles, and Bob seemed to like that, because he he even bought a story that I wrote about a gentleman attempting to stand for a local council in Lincolnshire in England, and that was of very marginal relevance, I would have thought, to American politics, but evidently it was. It had some messages. So
Well,
I was glad to find another outlet.
increasingly, Americans are turning to European magazines and newspapers for perspective on what's going on in the United States. I read The Guardian and The Economist because American journalism, with the exception of maybe Mother Jones and Wired, has very poor. Actually, I should also add to that The New Yorker has very poor long-range views of what's going on. They're happy to give you an analysis of how much ketamine Musk takes, but they're terrible at giving you a view of economics. Paul Krugman, who you probably know, is a very, very serious, deep economist who is doing sort of a lighter version of economic analysis on, I believe, a Substack.
But he also has a syndicated column.
But he's like the only person I ever trust on looking at economically what's going on, and he thinks it's pretty scary and dangerous, which is even more frightening.
Yeah, I read Krugman every day. He's very straightforward in his analysis, and he goes right to the heart of issues and explains it without requiring his readers necessarily to be economists themselves. I'd like to be able to do that.
Group,
I try.
Yeah. For this group, it's important to mention that he regularly comes to Worldcon.
Yes, he's a science fiction fan.
I didn't know that.
Yes.
Yes. I shall be amazed if he's read anything of mine. I have sold about 40 stories now, and I still manage to pass under the radar quite successfully. Nobody knows who I am.
Well, now another dozen people or so will know. All of our watchers.
Well, that's nice. Yes.
Yes.
One thing I should mention to our audience is that I sell stories, but I also sell a lot of reprints. And occasionally I have a story that doesn't quite mesh with whatever Bob is cooking up immediately. And I've discovered a growing number of, I wouldn't call them SF, but SF adjacent markets that were very interested in stories of mine. Factor 4 magazine, which is online. A group in Chicago called Quarantine that started during COVID. And also Third Flatiron, which is a science fiction publisher out of Colorado. They've all been, they're very interested in things that address culture and politics without necessarily having Martians landing, although we may be ready for that now.
Third Flatiron have taken 2 of my stories.
Very good.
And one of them got in the top 10 for the what was it, Critters and something. I've forgotten the award which it almost won. I wouldn't have forgotten if it had one. Anyway, yes, that's Juliana Rue, isn't it? I try to sell her something else every now and again. So far, the only other story I managed to sell her was not at all science fiction. It was a piece based on a couple of legends from England about a gentleman who rode a horse race with the devil. And I took that story and I mixed it with another one about a gentleman who buried a customs officer under the hearth of his public house, and so had to keep the fire lit all the time in case anybody would come along and try and find what had happened to the customs officer.
Yes. There are all sorts of wonderful stories out of England.
Oh well, we've been around a long time. You know, the legend of King Arthur sleeping in a cave in Yorkshire is my favourite. I think probably. According to a gentleman by the name of Thompson, he discovered this cave purely by accident and was never able to find it again. And then the army found it, and then they sent down a drummer boy who was told to play his drum all the way as he was going along the cave. And they tried to follow from the surface, but the drummer boy eventually disappeared without trace as well. So very sad.
Possibly,
But it's
possibly,
it's a lovely, apparently.
possibly sad, but possibly it was
I'm sorry.
a portal to another world, and he ended up going to a completely different place.
Well, it may have been so, but of course we know that King Arthur is to return.
Yes.
He's known as the once and future king, and we know this to be true by the totally unfabricated cross that was dug up near Glastonbury, which said, "Here lies King Arthur in the island of Babylon." They first of all have to tell you who's there, and secondly, where you're standing. That is not exactly likely to be a genuine account.
Yes.
But it is that there is such a cross. It does exist. The cross exists. Whether the grave of King Arthur exists is another question. It's very difficult to know who King Arthur was, of course.
Yes,
if he existed at all.
There are many different suggestions as to who Arthur might have been. And the myth is in many ways more important than the history.
Tom, I'm supposed to note that our logo with the sword and the snowflake, it actually makes reference to the King Arthur legend.
Yes, the sword is the sword that Guinevere, not Guinevere, the Lady of the Lake.
Lady of the Lake.
Lady of the Lake.
Keeps for Arthur. Yes.
I'm actually wondering if interest... Go ahead.
Yes?
I was saying
a lady who for...
It's very unusual for a lady who believes in wild swimming and also believes in holding a sword over her head while she does so. There can't be very many of these people about, I would have thought.
Probably more than you think. They don't have to be.
It's interesting if you actually, there are the odd few historical records, but they're mostly much later. And you never know whether monks particularly would have been representing what actually happened or what was believed to have happened. Nennius, for example, is writing quite some time after the events, and he claims one of the writers, Gildas, claims to be a contemporary of the Battle of Baden Hill.
Oh,
he was born apparently in the year that alleged Arthur fought the Saxons at the Battle of Baden Hill. Well, somebody fought somebody at the Battle of Baden Hill. That is factual. The only person who is ever mentioned as having been the leader of the English, by which I mean Brythonic Celtic tribes, is Arthur. And so if Arthur wasn't the leader of the English at the Battle of Baden Hill, then whoever was has been completely ejected from history by the legend, which would seem to be a slightly odd thing to happen. But there you go. It could have happened, of course. Plenty of cases.
Well, Boadicea is also... No,
I beg your pardon?
Fine. Boadicea is also mentioned as a leader of the Britons.
Oh, much earlier, of course. 68 AD, I think it was, something like that. In that
I
neck
don't
of
know
the
my
woods.
history that well. Yes.
Now,
I want to ask
whilst
if I want to ask if it seems likely that interest in King Arthur is at this time is because people are looking for political saviors and unifiers and legends of people who can get everyone to come together, because we have so very little of that, or what we have is so unfortunate that the whole concept of
yeah,
leadership, it's interesting because what part of what led up to where we are is, I think that people who were liberal became disenchanted with the idea of strong leadership and felt it was a very negative thing, whereas people who are on the conservative side fell in love with the idea of strong leadership. And it's one of the great dividing things in America. Ironically, the people who are into leadership believe in weak government, and the people who aren't into strong leaders believe in strong government.
Mhm. I don't think that
well, it
Arthur.
depends, I think,
I don't think that Arthur is
No.
quite as big now as he was back in, say, the '60s, with Kennedy referring to his cabinet as Camelot,
Camelot.
and the whole rise of the once and future king. All of the slightly later, you have the Disney movies, but I'm not seeing a whole lot of Arthurian stuff these days.
I'm not seeing it as specifically Arthurian,
No.
but a desire for a great leader.
The desire for a great leader
I
has
think
been
that
around a long time. Yes, Philip.
Now, I think that the motivation behind politics has changed. I really think that the late Queen Elizabeth II was probably the last of the generation inspired to public service in a selfless way. And the post-war generation, I'm talking about, I mean the post-First World War generation, of course. The people like Stanley Baldwin, who nobody thinks anything of today, but who would not have been a prominent politician, except that he's felt, I suppose you would, in modern analysis, you would call it survivor's guilt. He had survived the First World War, and so many of his generation had not. And he felt it a duty. He didn't want to be prime minister. He wanted to run an ironworks. But he felt it a duty to those who could not go forward to go forward himself. And that generation ran into the Second World War and came out of the Second World War with much the same attitude. And the late Queen Elizabeth was brought up with that attitude. But I think probably, as you were, sorry.
No, I think that I was thinking of the Republicans in America, and the last Republican with really that sense of service was Dwight Eisenhower. If you go back and look at a lot of what Eisenhower did, he very much, I don't even think he wanted to be president. He was seen as someone who could help the country, and he stepped up.
Yeah, I think that is, it was true also of British politicians of up to the 60s. In the 70s, it started to go towards the self-serving rather than the public service. And nowadays, whether people are in politics to become famous, whether they're in politics to exercise power, whether they, in some cases, actually want to get rich, because even if you don't use your office directly to get rich, which of course some people do, all you have to do is be thrown out, and you go on the lecture circuit and you become extremely rich, just for having been nobody in particular, but at the top of the whole tree for a while.
You know,
I don't think there is such a thing as a prime minister who hasn't made money out of it.
I may get in trouble.
Recently, I mean.
I may get in trouble for saying this, but I think one of the best things about the Bushes, senior and junior, was that they already had plenty of money and they liked the way they lived. And they just kind of viewed this as being president was sort of something you did if you were from a wealthy family, which is very, very different from a lot of what we have seen, sort of what took over. They were very laissez-faire presidents. And what we really saw was the growth of people running for Senate and running for Congress who were in it for the money and how many bribes they could get and what they could get. You know, after you leave, all these lobbyists owe you money, so you end up as the CEO of something. And I think that this rot sort of took place initially at our Senate and governorship level, and then it led to Trump.
Yes.
Yes. Well, we no longer have anybody likes. Nobody likes Cincinnatus these days. Nobody is going back to the plow after they've run the country.
Yes. One of the comments over the side is liberals want strength in a leader. Conservatives seem to want a dictator. Cheryl Alexander said.
I think American conservatism is not the same as British conservatism.
No.
And likewise, American liberalism isn't the same as. In fact, I didn't mention in my very quick summary of my personal history, I stood for Parliament back in 1979 for the Liberal Party, which existed in those days and which was in fact a Liberal Party in the classical sense of the word. Not long after, I wasn't utterly unsuccessful. And that is to say, in order to stand for election in the UK in those days, you had to put up a substantial deposit. Well, substantial. I think it was £500, which was sort of cobbled together by a lot of not very affluent people, and I was very worried that we would lose it. Because if you don't get 12.5% of the vote, you lose your deposit. This is supposed to discourage trivial or frivolous
people like the Raving Loony Party.
The Raving Loony Party, of course, or the Monster Raving Loony Party, to give it its full name, actually beat the Social Democrats in a by-election in Liverpool about 50 years ago. So it depends how serious you want your politicians to be.
Yes.
But yeah, no, it's part of the colour of British elections that you do get frivolous candidates. Lord Buckethead, for example, who genuinely wears a bucket on his head, and so. And Screaming Lord Sutch, the pop singer, was the founder of the Monster Raving Loony Party. Wow. He was a good singer as well. But
yes. I have to ask, this is a complete question from left field, but did you happen to know a Liberal Democrat member of Parliament named David Ward?
He doesn't ring a bell.
I am completely curious. One of my best friends from high school.
My problem with the Liberal Democrats, so I haven't. Oh, right. No. There are these days a lot of Liberal Democrat MPs. In my day, there were about 8, and you could know them all. But nowadays.
Wow.
So Philip, I don't know how much you're following American politics on a day-by-day basis. No, he can't.
Liberal nor Democratic.
I'm sorry, my connection just cut out. No, they're not liberal. They believe in forcing people to do things, which I don't. You know, I go back to John Stuart Mill, who said people basically should be allowed to do anything they like as long as it doesn't harm and I stress the word harm, somebody else. Now, being offended is not being harmed.
Mhm.
According to John Miller, there's absolutely no right not to be offended. In fact, in some cases, there is a distinct need to be offended. My Substack articles that when I first started writing, I would have gotten nowhere if I'd allowed myself to be offended by criticism. The criticism was, not all of it was constructive, but that which was constructive was very useful indeed. And I think people who can't take any form of criticism, even constructive criticism, and get offended at the least little thing, are not helping themselves. I was helped to be a much better, well, depends how good you think I am now, but I'm much better than I was as a writer, simply by people telling me where I was going wrong. And say, you've done this wrong, do it this way instead, and so on.
I want to ask you about a cultural difference between our government in daily practice, which is I've seen, of course, dramas and stuff that show what Parliament is like, with people mumbling and shouting and applauding and stuff like that. And that in the United States, I grew up in Washington, D.C. As a child, I used to go and see Congress in action, and it's generally pretty quiet. But recently, there has been lots of yelling and screaming where people actually boo the president during the State of the Union and stuff like that. It would that happen in England? Would people boo like
The prime minister?
the prime minister?
They wouldn't boo the queen
No.
or the king.
They wouldn't boo anybody, or the speaker would stand up and rule them out of order. Neither are they allowed to applaud, although when the SNP went from half a dozen members up to about 50, they decided they would applaud, and they just that is not considered acceptable behavior, nor is it considered acceptable behavior to, shall we say, call somebody a liar. Indeed, Churchill fell foul of that one day, and he was told by the speaker to retract the statement that somebody was a liar. And he stood up and said, "I am sorry, Mr. Speaker. What I meant to say was the honourable member was guilty of a terminological inexactitude," which is...
Boy, I somehow cannot see any of the current members of Congress saying something like that, but it's nice to think about. It actually would inspire me to do a short story of if our current Congress were in England, what they would be saying instead.
Well, you realize, of course, that our Parliament is not physically the same shape as the Congress. We don't have this horseshoe shape. We have two opposing banks of benches, allegedly two swords lengths apart. So you have the government on one side, and you have the opposition on the other side, and nobody's allowed to bring a sword in these days, except the only weapon is the one carried by, now is it Black Rod or somebody anyway, is responsible for carrying in the mace, which is the symbol of office, and placing it on the table, which the dispatch boxes are held on a table, and the mace is at this end of the table, and the speaker's clerk is at the other end of the table, and the speaker is up on a dais a little bit higher so that everybody can see him. So that's the only weapon in Parliament these days. But it evolved from the court party and the country party, who used to shout at each other back in the days of Elizabeth I and Charles I. So yeah, they've been shouting at each other for a long time. And the conventions require them not actually to abuse each other, though they come quite close to it. The trouble is,
do members of Parliament have to be physically present in order to register their vote?
yes, at the moment they do. In fact, they have to get up from their seats, and they go out when a division is called. That's our name for a vote. They get up from their seats and they file out through one or other of two voting lobbies. One is the aye lobby, and the other is the nay lobby. And each lobby has two tellers who count who's gone through and are recorded. And then they all come back into the chamber, and the tellers come up to the table, and they report the result of the vote. And you can always tell who's won, because the tellers for that side stand on the right-hand side, and the losing tellers stand on the left-hand side when they come up to the table. And it's then the ayes to the right, so and so, the noes to the left, so and so.
The United
Sorry, nose to the right is the ayes.
The United States has got some interesting issues going on because we are so physically large. There has been an issue with people going back to their constituents, which is like a 12-hour plane and everything, and then having a vote called, and they're trying to get back to Washington, and everyone's trying to delay the vote. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
We have a
Do you not have a
goes back
pairing
into the
system?
early days when it was a lot longer to get between any parts of the country.
Yeah.
You know, that's been a
Yeah.
standard.
Well, we have a pairing system.
Mhm.
We have a pairing system which, if you know that X is going to vote yes and Y is going to vote no, you can let both X and Y miss the vote, and it makes no difference. So that's how it works. The whips arrange it. Now, is whip? Yes, whip is the same in
Yes.
American, isn't it? Yeah, that's a fox hunting term, of course.
A what?
Comes from fox hunting.
Oh, okay.
The whipper-in is the assistant huntsman, and he keeps the hounds in line.
With his whip.
Someone asked about
With his whip, yeah. Although he doesn't actually hit them, he cracks the whip to attract the hound's attention. And
someone has asked about waving a handkerchief in Parliament for symbolic reasons. Is that a tradition?
Not one that I'm familiar with. Certainly, I have never seen it done. I can't swear that it doesn't exist, but I certainly am not familiar with it.
Maybe if they're Morris dancers.
Wait a minute. I think it may be confusing. It may look like handkerchiefs. I think it's the order paper. The waving of the order paper is a significant gesture of approval. When, for example, the Prime Minister or the Leader of the Opposition takes his or her seat, their supporters will sometimes wave the order paper to show their solidarity. Yes, not handkerchiefs.
In England, do they have things that are equivalent to the filibuster, where people stand up and speak all night?
Yes, but it doesn't usually work like that, because we have what's known as guillotine. And if it looks as though a bill is going to be talked out, the majority will impose a guillotine which brings the debate to a halt. But if they haven't done it before the debate starts, in other words, if they anticipate that it will be talked out, they can impose a guillotine. If they don't anticipate it and somebody tries to talk it out, it will actually just run out of time if somebody's still on his feet talking when the time runs out. But they don't have to talk all night. Usually, just when the time, normal time for the end of the session comes, there will be a shout, or there used to be a shout, "Who goes home?" Because the various officers of the Parliament would be arranging cabs, horse-drawn hackney carriages, to take the members home. They don't use horse-drawn hackney carriages anymore, but they still call the cabs hackney carriages. A London black cab is technically a hackney carriage.
Philip, do citizens, voters in the UK, do they have a good understanding of how Parliament works? Because one of the problems we're having in the United States right now is that voters don't really understand. They can't understand how we can have a bill that is about clean water, but people attach all this stuff to it, cutting off Medicare. We have riders on bills. Do people in the UK understand Parliament?
Not all that well. In fact, I don't think that necessarily even the members of Parliament understand Parliament all that well. You may remember Boris Johnson tried to prorogue Parliament in 2019 when there was an effectively an attempted filibuster against leaving the European Union. And he thought he would get rid of Parliament for a couple of months whilst the deadline for leaving the EU ran out. And he was ruled to be unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. So if you could argue that even Boris Johnson didn't know how Parliament worked, that's assuming the Supreme Court knows how Parliament works, which I'm not always convinced of, but nevertheless. I'm sure they know what they're talking about a lot better than I do.
In the United States, we have an interesting issue going on right now where traditionally, if presidents tried to do unconstitutional things, the Supreme Court would tell them it was unconstitutional. And what we've got going on now is a Supreme Court that is reinterpreting the Constitution to be anything the president wants it to be. And we also have a president who is very, very likely to ignore the Supreme Court if they rule against him, which is really making things a little scary over here.
It always worries me when I find a system where judges are elected. I would rather judges were appointed for their knowledge of the law. Our Supreme Court, nobody knows what political parties they are interested in, or what they would be required not to follow party political lines in any case. But generally speaking, we don't even know. Because they have never had to run for election, not even when they first started on the bench. The bench basically consists of senior lawyers who are appointed from the King's Council, who are the most senior of the actual working advocates.
Our Supreme Court and most of our judges at higher levels are appointed, but they're appointed by the President of the United States. And they're confirmed by
the Senate.
And the problem has been that when the Senate interviews them, they lie to the Senate about their views. They're asked about how they feel about abortion. They're asked how they feel about all sorts of things. And recently, they've been lying and then going on to the Supreme Court and voting in ways that are completely not what they told the Senate they were going to do.
Yeah.
It's pretty scary.
There's always a problem. Yeah, there's always a problem with appointment because though in theory you divorce the appointment-making body from the executive by setting up what we call a quango, or a quasi-autonomous non-governmental organization, which is supposed to be completely independent. But you don't know whether they are in fact independent. You just have to take it on trust. If they start behaving as though they aren't independent, that becomes a problem. But it generally does not happen.
Yeah.
I mean, there have been cases. I mean, when the Supreme Court ruled against the various Brexit procedures upon occasion, one of the scandal sheets ran a headline, "Enemies of the People," which is, of course, taken from the French Revolution. And you know what happened to enemies of the people.
Yes.
But no, the theory is that they are not there to create law. They are there merely to
interpret.
Say with, yeah, well, no, to say with complete accuracy what the law says. What was Parliament's intention when Parliament passed this law? A lot of the trouble that we have at the moment with international courts, and because we've signed up to a lot of international treaties like the European Human Rights, for example, the European Court of Human Rights has been for a number of years now gradually engaged in mission creep. That is to say, they are not, they're not strictly speaking interpreting the European Charter of Human Rights themselves. They are interpreting what the European Charter of Human Rights framers would have said if they had had to apply it to present day circumstances, which are different.
That is,
And thus we have
no, that is a problem.
we have had as a
in the U.S. as well, because
with the Constitution, which is so old. Yeah.
one of
Yes.
our big issues has been gun control, and we now have types of guns that, you used to have a gun that you shot it and you killed somebody. We now have guns that you could shoot it and kill 80 people in 1 minute. And the Supreme Court has, I think, struggled to figure out what this means, and they have come up with very differing ideas depending on what side of the question they're on. But it's tough, involving all sorts of things, involving the speed of communication, involving, society has changed a lot, and technology is a big part of it. And I think that has exacerbated the confusion about what the Supreme Court should or shouldn't be doing. The whole idea,
I think the circumstances
in the U.S., the idea is you appoint these people for life, and it removes their incentive, to figure out what the next job is and how they'll get it. But it doesn't seem to be working.
Yeah. Well, I do think it's very tricky if you have to be a judge who's re-elected. That seems to me very strange. Can you be on the one hand, and on the other hand, looking towards your next election? Can you do both at the same time? I think it must be a very difficult balancing act for an elected judge.
That is only
at the same time, of course, as we say, an appointed judge who's appointed for life.
Our state courts are elected, but our federal system is appointed. So, which actually, I find that to be an interesting balance.
Specifically with appointment, you can have limits. You say that somebody is appointed for 18 years, for example, and they can't be reappointed.
Yes. Yeah.
And then, yes, you have to worry about what you're doing next, but it's not the same thing, and it's not the same thing.
Yeah. Well, we had only 20 odd years ago, we had a major political upheaval when the House of Lords was effectively overturned and became almost completely appointed house, whereas it had been an almost completely hereditary house up to that point. Now, hereditary peers did tend to be slanted towards the Conservative Party. So, but since then, we've had a sort of competition to appoint as many peers as possible of your own party whilst you're in government. And we now have I think it's the second biggest legislature in the world, behind only the People's Republic of China, is our House of, and they just nominate more and more instead of having a manageable house. The good thing about it was they at one time used to nominate specialists in various fields, people who actually knew what they were talking about, in nor housing nor transport or whatever, but who would never have run for election because they weren't that kind of people. And the standard of debate in the House of Lords used to be truly impressive.
Wow.
More recently, sadly, we just pastured out retired political hacks who know nothing and care less and sometimes don't even turn up. And so you do have a manageable house simply because they don't turn up, but they don't have the standard of debate that they used to have.
Interesting.
That's not to say that the standard of debate in the House of Commons is a whole lot better, which is where most of them, or many of them, have come from. And of course, a lot of people can get appointed to the House of Lords by donating a large sum of money to the governing party, which is another piece of absurdity, but it was invented by Lloyd George 100 years ago. So it's not exactly new. You could buy a peerage effectively by donating a lot of money.
Are there still any hereditary peers or not anymore?
Yes. Well, there are still some at the moment, though the proposal is that there shouldn't be. Funnily enough, they're the only elected portion of the House, because the hereditary peers who sit in the House of Lords are elected by the other hereditary peers, most of whom don't.
Yes.
We've got hundreds of peers, as you may know, and only, I can't remember what number it is, but a small number, it's 2 figures, not 3, out of 800 and something members.
Yes.
I cannot actually remember the actual number.
Yes. Peter Dickinson, I believe, was a hereditary peer.
He was?
He had.
I'm sorry?
Peter Dickinson, I believe, was a hereditary peer. He had a peer's.
Well, he may have been, but he wouldn't have been called Peter Dickinson.
Yeah.
But that was his right. He wrote as
hereditary
Peter
peers
Dickinson.
are always known by that title.
Yes.
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 A hereditary peer is always known by his title.
Yes.
So
Like
he
Lord
may well have been
Dunsany.
Peter Dickinson, but I wouldn't. Yes, that's right. You're usually named after a place, though occasionally they would take some version of their own name. For example, Alan Brooke, one of the chief generals of the Second World War and advisor, I beg your pardon, not ally, of Winston Churchill, was after the war promoted to the peerage as Lord Alan Brooke, which sounds as if it's a place, but it wasn't. It was just his name. But I don't know a Lord Peter Dickinson, I'm afraid.
Yes.
No, he wasn't. He was a he had the Order of the British Empire, but he wasn't a peer.
Okay.
I got you. Okay. Oh well, the Order of the British Empire is another thing that has changed, because originally a lot of these orders were simply rewards for doing your job if you happen to be in a particular job, and people thought that was a bit ridiculous. So they have revamped it now, and you can actually nominate anybody you like for the OBE. Sorry, you can nominate for the MBE. The appointments committee will then decide if they're worth an MBE, an OBE, or a CBE. Unfortunately, that was my mistake in being invalided out of the diplomatic service, because had I managed to see out my career in the diplomatic service, I would have found my way, in all probability, into the Royal Victorian Order. No, I beg your pardon, not the Royal Victorian Order, the Order of St. Michael and St. George. And the lowest rank of the Order of St. Michael and St. George, which I might have aspired to, was the CMG, which is always universally known as the Call Me God. And then if you went up one higher, you were a KCMG, or Knight Commander, which was always known as Kindly Call Me God. And if you got right to the top, you were a Knight Grand Cross, or GCMG, which is, of course, translated as God Calls Me God. So there.
I think the British have much more fun with this than the Americans. But if we had orders like this, Trump would be appointing people to them left and right, and it would be really depressing.
Well, the way he is appointing people is really
You
depressing.
mean you don't?
No, we do not have knighthoods yet.
Yes.
Oh well, no, not necessarily knighthoods, but orders of chivalry. You can be. There are various. I mean, the Order of the Bath, for example, was invented sometime. I think it was the 14th century. According to 1066 and all that,
Yes.
it was founded by a king who saw a lady whose garter had fallen off, and who memorably mottoed himself in French, "On y soit qui mal y pense," or "Honey, your silk stockings hanging down," which isn't what it means, of course. But,
No.
but that's what 1066 and all that called it.
I love it.
Book, by the way,
And
it's
Bob
100
is
years
back.
old now. It's 100 years.
Oh, yes. It's a wonderful
Bob is
book.
back. He's going to tell us to go away. Oh,
Yes,
I
unfortunately.
I bought several copies. Ah, there we go. Just when we were enjoying ourselves, Bob. And nobody else
Well,
was, but we were.
I like to think of myself as that, as they used to call me at work sometimes, is the wet blanket of regulation upon the spark of creativity. Editor, that's the editor in me. But Philip, I've over the years, I mean, you have appeared. Do you know how many times you've appeared in BQ Press publications?
6 or 7, I think, probably.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
I think you've published me more than anybody else. It used to be Flame Tree, who has published me 5 times, but I think you overtook them last year, and I think it's either 6 or 7.
Yeah, it's. I mean,
Mind you, some of them are.
you and Karen here are two of my most prolific attendees in our anthology, so to speak, and I appreciate you both. You provide differing perspectives, but both in all cases, it's excellent work, and I just want to appreciate that.
Well, that's nice to hear.
Thank you.
That's nice to hear.
And we are coming in on the end of the hour, and I just wanted to take a moment and remind people what is going on with BQ Press. We live, but we are. I have made a decision that we are going to come back with something from a sequel to Alternative Liberties. It's just that, as I have told people, we have some commitments internal to other works. Karen's looking for the book to hold up.
Karen's looking for the book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. One of them is putting a new cover, Alternative Liberties. And right now, the same gentleman that did that cover, excuse me, is developing a new cover so we can re-release our Alternative Truths. Now, while I love
The very
that
first
cover
book.
and the snowflake, as I was pointing out earlier, you can see our snowflake up there trying to cover up Philip's head.
Yeah, well, it's probably a good idea.
Hey, the sword and the snowflake came from Susan MacDonald's story, and it wasn't so much the lady in the lake, but it was she wrote a story about the return of King Arthur when the country needed it most, and that point in British history where the country needed him most was when Donald Trump's airplane was landing in Heathrow.
Yeah.
And that's when the snowflake and the sword was in the top. We flipped it around, and then it became the warrior snowflake. Do you have your little hat around?
I do not.
Your little hat.
Oh, let me go see if I can find it.
Well, no,
So-
Karen was one of the people who took and turned it upside down in the beret and turned it into a warrior snowflake. So we have loved the snowflake ever since the one guy referred to us as a whole bunch of snowflakes in a review.
Yes. Cheryl
But
Alexander asks, why a new cover?
yeah, why a new cover? We loved the cover. We really did. Alexander James Adams did a great job while on tour, and but the reality of it is, the every now and then you want to put something out with an updated forward and the like, and you say, okay, was that cover the best cover we could have come up with? And it was a great cover, but we're looking to update, keep things fresh, not be afraid to admit that no matter what we do, we can always do better. And the one thing I'd like to mention is that we have coming up, I don't know who Cliff Winnig is bringing in next week, but I do know that on the 22nd, we have Mark Tufo coming in. Mark Tufo has just finished, and do not laugh, he writes zombie books, okay? But he is the best, funniest zombie writer I've ever seen. Things happen in his books that don't happen in other people's books. People firing and cannot continuously fire an M16 without finding out that the barrel will burn you if you touch it.
Yes.
The people who climb up on roofs sometimes have trouble getting down. He's a former Marine, and I have bruises from the one time in a bar in Orlando, I had a discussion with a fella who understood that, who taught me that there are no ex-Marines, there's only former Marines. Hey.
So his books want to eat your brains?
Huh?
His books want to eat your brains? They're zombie books.
Yeah.
Bob, did you know you can buy his entire 26 book zombie series on Kindle for $117, which is an amazing bargain for 26 books.
And they're 26 funny, well-written books with interesting characters. But I don't want to do the interview now. I'm just saying he's coming on the 22nd, and then we're coming in on one thing that is really bothering me, and I want to hear you guys' take on it. You know, because when I posted this out, I thought you guys might be talking more politics, and I made reference to George Orwell, a fine British author who wrote Animal Farm, which is possibly one of the greatest pieces of satire that I think we're living through now.
Yes.
Fortunately, again, it was well known for his dislike of Joseph Stalin, and I swear, Putin, Stalin. We seem to have a affinity for Russian leadership in the White House right now. But thoughts on LA and whether or not we will still have a democracy on June 16th. Any thoughts? Quick ones?
I want to say that Gavin Newsom is right on the line right now. His leadership, this will make or break him.
Yes, and I got a sneaking suspicion he'll wind up in ICE custody.
He is the governor of California, and he controls a bunch of stuff in California. And it seems as though one thing that's going on is the federal government is trying to order all the police departments to work for them, and that's going to be
a major fight
issue.
Well, it is right now. The idea Trump has that anybody with a badge and a gun should be loyal to him, and you know, you go out there and look. You want to really scare yourself? go look at the political goings on in retired sheriff's associations, retired police officer associations. They're being organized to become Trump's private police force and form the core. So this we're not going to do it all on this show, but we're going to have a show coming up pretty soon that goes into the um, how it's going to be. What is Trump really trying to do? And the reality of it is that by the time the people grow the will to stop it, it may be too late. I mean, he
One of the
pointed
problems
and
that we're having is that when bad cops get convicted of bribery, of whatever they've done, Trump just pardons them, and then they
Yes.
become part of his militia. And that just happened with a Virginia sheriff who was in a huge bribery and corruption case, and the courts got him, and Trump gave him a full pardon, and now he's going to work for Trump.
yeah, I mean, it is just the reality that he's using the power of the presidency as a power of an unregulated monarch. I mean, King John would couldn't get away with the stuff that Trump's getting away with today. Replacing Congress with executive orders, which are nothing more than royal decrees. But that's another story. I just wanted to say, guys, never forget BQ Press is a political entity. We write and publish political satire sometimes, but you may go back and realize that we're writing about serious things. We're writing about whether the country survives as a democracy, uh, period. So now with that said, I just want to say, Tom, take it away. Take it out.
Well, any last statements from either KG or Philip?
Well, I see a question in the comments saying, how big is the House of Commons? So the answer is 650 members. The House of Lords has over 800. I can't remember the exact
Wow.
Wow. Yes.
That's not a comment on anything that anybody has said before, of course.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't. My closing remarks were I read The Guardian and The Economist because I want to see what folks overseas think is going on, and in this country I read Joyce Vance and Heather Cox Richardson, and I really urge people to read Paul Krugman because it is as interesting as all the legal stuff is. The laws are being violated and ignored and changed left and right. The economy is sort of like a force of nature. Money's gonna do its thing no matter what Trump tries to tell it to do. Really follow Paul Krugman. He's the authority in that area, and his writing is really important.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Could I add Robert Reich? I follow both
Yeah.
Paul and Heather, and I'd like to add Robert Reich as well.
Yes.
Very good guy to follow.
Yeah. Thank you both for coming and doing this with me, and I'm glad you were here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, guys.
Karen.
And I'll leave you with one final thought. Resist. Stand up. Get out. Wave your signs. If you can, protest on social media, but don't go silently. Don't let the folks who are the right wingers who are only listening to Newsmax and only social media outlet is Trump. You may not be able to touch them, but let the rest of the people that know that there is an active resistance to the evil that is trying to permeate our landscape. And I'm glad to be here with three people who probably understand that. So that said,
and it's not just the U.S., it's everywhere. I mean,
it is.
why we bring in people from England